Matt, thank you for joining this conversation today. Really delighted to know you for many years,
Mhm.
but want you to talk about the past and the future. So first of all, Matt, tell us what you do today.
Well, Jim, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be on with you. You've been a great friend for a long time. And I am now, as of a month ago, I left office as the Attorney General of the state. And wear a couple hats. Principally, I'm the founding partner of a new law firm, Platkin LLP, along with some of my great colleagues from the office. Mission-driven law firm that is a litigation shop. And I'm also a distinguished scholar at NYU Law School at the Center for Law and Public Trust.
Wonderful. So tell us, you've had an extraordinary career so far, and you're still relatively young. So tell us the path you've taken from, say, high school or college. How did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I'm born and raised here in New Jersey. I grew up in Morris County Public School, and I fell in love with Stanford watching Brevin Knight, great Essex County point guard, play there in the late 90s, and that was what I wanted to do. So I went to Stanford for college, and as I graduated, it was the President Obama was coming to office, and it was also the worst financial crisis in the history of this country, and I think other than the Great Depression, and I think that period, that event, and my high school 9/11, going to high school during 9/11 really shaped my worldview and pushed me to go into public service. And so I moved to Washington, D.C. after graduating. From Stanford. I had no job. My mom loved that. I applied to every single Democratic office in Congress. We had 60 votes in the Senate and a significant majority in the House. We probably won't see that again in the same numbers, and not a single interview. So I ended up working at the Brookings Institution, and then a friend of mine from San Antonio, Texas, called me and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about running for city council." I was 23, and I said, "Well, if you run, I'll move to Texas. I'll move into your mom's house, and I'll run your campaign." And so that's what I did. And from there, we can talk about the journey, but it's been a series of exciting adventures that maybe in the moment didn't make a lot of sense even to me sometimes, but it put me in places to do amazing things and work with amazing people. And I've loved every minute of it.
That's great. So take us from Texas. I went to grad school in Texas, so I have some
Yeah.
some understanding of the culture there. But how long were you there, and then how did you get back to Jersey?
Yeah, I mean, I always knew I was coming back to Jersey. That was not really a debate. In fact, people were probably sick of hearing me say it. By the way, I met my wife on that campaign, so I helped increase the New Jersey population from Texas and one with it by at least one. Um, yeah, I mean that campaign was an amazing experience. It was the better part of a year. I admit that we didn't really know anything going into it. He was 23. He's one of my best friends. I was 23. We we just kind of wanted to make a difference, and there had been a lot of corruption in his district. Three council members, I think, had gone to jail for bribery, and it was a low-income district, but it was also a really interesting district. It was the Lackland Air Force Base, big military presence. It was sort of the start of the Tea Party, so you had this like very conservative element, but also a significant undocumented population, all kind of living together. And San Antonio, many people don't know, is the sixth or seventh largest city in America. So the district we were talking about was the size of a congressional district. But the nice thing about it, Jim, was that it was nonpartisan. So I spent most of my time there, as did Ray, the candidate, just talking to people, going door to door and listening to them about their concerns about government. And when you strip, I've never forgotten these lessons. I'm privileged. I had, great public education here in New Jersey, two Stanford degrees, but the best education I had was in San Antonio because when you strip the politics away from the conversation, when you just get down what it really matters to people, whether you have a D or an R in your name, people generally want the same things. They want safe communities, they want good jobs, they want their kids to have a decent education. There's not, they want their streets to be safe. We went in, we had all these big ideas, Stanford ideas, whatever, and then we kept talking to people. You know what the number one issue on that campaign was? Stray dogs. And it makes sense because San Antonio at the time had the biggest stray dog population in the country. And if you've ever been chased or mauled by a stray dog, as I have, you don't really care about anything else. Okay. So I used to tell that story in the office because like you think things are important to you and you think things matter and they do, but the things that matter to everyday people's lives are what's front and center, and we should never lose sight of that.
Yeah, I didn't think stray dogs would enter this conversation, but that is sort
You
of
never know where you're
fascinating.
going to go when you have me on, Jim. I can keep
Exactly.
telling you
Well, all
stories.
right, bring it. You got back to Jersey, take us through what was next.
Yeah, so I ended up going back to Stanford for law school. During law school, I worked on Senator Booker's 2013 and 2014 campaigns. I didn't really know much about politics. I didn't ask him. I don't even know if I ever met the senator, who I love, but I just didn't know how it worked. But I made some really good friends, including Matt Clapper, who was his chief policy person, and then became his chief of staff. And sort of unbeknownst to me, I got referred over to folks working with Phil Murphy. I was practicing law at New York City at the time, but I was living here in Montclair. I knew I wanted to come back to the state and to work in state government in some way. And so I got introduced to him late 2014, early 2015. He wasn't even a candidate. He had an organization advocating for middle class economic issues, which is when we met. I just really liked him, and he was an adult and he wanted to take on, the tough issues that were facing the state. And I basically said, if you want to do that, I'm happy to help you. And so I volunteered. I was on investigations overseas for my day job, and I would sort of work all day for them, and then I'd work at night. And I did that for, I guess, the better part of a year. And then ultimately, he asked me to come on board first as the policy director for the organization that he was running, and then ultimately as the policy director for his gubernatorial campaign, which, as we know, was obviously successful.
So then you were policy director, or when did you become AG?
So I was policy director for the duration of the campaign. I was also the first lawyer on that campaign, and then I served as his chief counsel for the first 3 years of the administration, which was an extraordinary job. I mean, probably the hardest job you could have in government, I think, that or chief of staff to the governor here in New Jersey, because the governor is so powerful. But the governor's office, people don't realize this, is actually quite small. And so there's really nothing that doesn't come across his or her desk. And I have just tremendous admiration for the current folks, for Tim Lydon and Alex Ball and Kelly Doucette. I know exactly what they're going through at the start of administration. It's not easy. You're trying to implement a governor's agenda, get hit with two snowstorms. Like you don't have any control, and yet you're responsible for everything. And I served that job. That job, typical tenure is about a year. I served that job for 3 years, including the start of the COVID pandemic, which I feel like was 3 years every day. And I left briefly, and then I was appointed by Governor Murphy as Attorney General at the start of his second term in 2022.
Got it. And you mentioned COVID, obviously, not the typical administration having to deal with these challenges. So reflect on sort of what you saw when you came in and sort of some of the things that were important for you and Governor Murphy to sort of tackle and change and, give us sort of a retrospective for us.
As Attorney General or as Chief Counsel?
Both, both. I
Yeah.
mean, clearly you saw new things with fresh eyes when you came in at the beginning, and obviously you learned from that. What can you share?
Yeah, look, I think kind of like Governor Murphy, I wasn't, I never worked in Trenton, which I know some people like to be critical of. I actually think it was an advantage. I wasn't sort of I hadn't had 30 years of how things are done baked into me. And look, like, I think there's a lot of great things about uh, how Trenton works, but I think there were a lot of things that were broken. And, you don't have 11 straight credit downgrades and, gross stories of corruption if things are working great, period. And so, coming after the Chris Christie years, I think there were a lot of things we wanted to change. And I'm proud. That first year, Governor Murphy took some really tough budget stances. I was right in the middle of those with him, and it set the state on a path. Remember, we hadn't made a full pension payment in decades. He made five. And, so that is a really extraordinary fact. Righting the fiscal ship, I think having ethical leadership, and, taking on big issues that were affecting the state. Nothing's perfect, and I have huge admiration for Governor Sherrill and her team, and obviously Attorney General Davenport is a close friend of mine, somebody I just have tremendous respect for. So, they're going to do great things. And I think the thing you realize when you come in, I served almost the entirety of the Murphy administration, plus about 2.5 years on the campaign. So over a decade, really, of my life spent sort of working, thinking, advocating at very high levels in state government and politics. And you get a lot done, and you're proud of that. There's always stuff that you didn't get to, and there's always more to do. And so, I think I'm very proud. This was the first Democrat reelected in my lifetime. It was again, fiscal house is in order. As AG, we could go through lowest level of gun violence in state history, 3 years running. Took on some of the biggest companies in the world that are harming our kids, record-setting environmental settlements, healthcare settlements, taking on corruption. You could go on down the list, but I'm very proud of the results that we had in the Murphy administration, and I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to serve this state.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about first of the things you're really proud of, as far as, we have a lot of the business community is listening in on this conversation. What are you most proud of? And then we can get to sort of what things that you wish you had been able to tackle and hope that the next administration tackles.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned gun violence. I don't think uh, you could ignore the results we've had. I got into public service in large part because of gun violence. I'd say, and I mean it, I grew up in the Columbine generation. I'm now raising two kids here in New Jersey, um, with gun violence being the number one cause of death for children. I think regardless of how you view the Second Amendment, if that doesn't bother you, then that speaks more about you than it does about the issue. And so, we did a lot of things, starting my time in governor's office and then as attorney general, that I think meaningfully contributed to reducing gun violence. Historic investments in community-based solutions to gun violence, passing and defending strongest gun safety laws in America. I launched the first office of its kind in the country dedicated to holding bad actors in the firearms industry accountable. The 10 years before I took office as AG, we averaged 1,300 shootings. Last year, we had 559. So 60% reduction. And I'm extraordinarily proud of that. I'm proud of the work we did, like I said, taking on big tech. We were the lead state in many of the largest lawsuits ever filed by attorneys general against Meta and TikTok for the harms being caused to our kids. We were the first state to sue Discord, a platform with 200 million kids on it, where they have grossly misrepresented the safety protocols that they've put in place for children. We sued Apple in the largest antitrust case ever filed alongside the Department of Justice. So we led a lot of big suits, which is something that I said we were going to do. New Jersey was not going to be sitting on the sidelines on some of the biggest issues. And look, you can't ignore what we did over the final year of the administration. Dozens of lawsuits standing up for the rule of law. And people can say what they want. They can say it's politics. I would just challenge anyone. Which of the lawsuits should we have sat out? Tens of billions of dollars have flowed to our state. Our university systems are still functioning. Our hospital systems are still functioning, largely because of the litigations that my office brought. Birthright citizenship is still a part of the United States Constitution because of the lawsuit we filed on the president's second day in office and litigated all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. So I'm proud of the fact that we didn't shy away from tough fights. We took them on. When you do that, you certainly take your bruises. Some people like it, some people don't. But I've never regretted for a day being someone that was willing to stand up for the people of New Jersey.
Well, I couldn't agree with at least the tech part. Safety and regulations are really critical. And, I've advocated for,
Yep.
these things for a long time. Still am. I just wrote an article on AI companions and the dangers that they pose to young
Yeah.
people.
One of the last things I did was I led a multi-state letter. These are bipartisan, by the way. People don't realize it. We had 42 states on this letter. I did it with Dave Sunday, the AG in Pennsylvania, about the harms chatbots pose to children, to the 13 largest AI companies in the world. And look, in a normal world, Jim, with a functioning Congress, these products would be regulated, by the federal government. But we don't have a functioning Congress, and we certainly don't have a functioning federal government. They're completely in bed with big tech. And so most of these uh, policies that are being put in place are being put in place essentially by state legislatures and governors and by state attorneys general that are bringing lawsuits. And we could question whether that's the most efficient way to do things, but that's the reality we have in this country. And I think that's how these industries are going to be shaped for many years to come.
Yeah, no, totally get that. What about initiatives or challenges that you wish you had the time or capacity to take on?
Look, there's always more things that you want to do. I mean, there's every single day. The great thing about being attorney general, and to some degree, I'm emulating that in the type of law firm we're building. But the great thing about being attorney general is you read something in the newspaper and you're like, this doesn't seem right. Can this really happen? People seem like they're getting hurt. And then you go and do something. I mentioned Discord. Great example of that. I found out about Discord, the harms on Discord, because I went to my neighbor's house and he was distraught about what his 10-year-old son had seen on the platform. And so I went in, I was on one of the steering, I was on the national steering committee for the social media cases. And I basically said, we got to look at Discord. And so for us, we started looking at it. And then shortly after that, the Tops supermarket shooting in Buffalo happened, where 10 people were killed. That shooter laid out his manifesto on Discord. And so, that really launched the investigation that led to what I think will be a groundbreaking lawsuit, first state in the country to do it. So, I think when you leave government, especially when you leave government in the types of roles that I've been privileged to have, you always will miss that impact. For me, that's what drove me. People can say a lot of things about me, but I think it's hard to say that I did anything other than what I thought was right. And I wasn't afraid to do it, to take on those tough fights, even when it was against powerful interests. I think the I don't have regrets. I would, but sure, there's a lot of cases you wish you could have made, or a lot of reforms you wish you could have gotten to. I mean, I'm proud that we reduced gun violence to 559, but that's still 559 too many. So there's always work to be done.
Yeah, for sure. What about the new administration? Any guidance you're giving them or any thoughts you have for them? I'm sure they could use your wealth of experience
No,
as
they've got extraordinary people. I'm just rooting for them. First and foremost, I'm a New Jerseyan and we're raising our kids here. And by the way, I'd be rooting for whoever's in that office. I know what it's like to be there, especially in the first days. Things eventually kind of settle down. You hit a little bit of a rhythm, but those first few months are crazy. You're trying to figure things out. You're staffing up. You're putting your agenda to place. Like I said, you're getting hit with all kinds of things, storms, emergencies. You got a lunatic in the White House who's shutting down Gateway, who's doing all kinds of stuff. So you're dealing with tons of incoming. So the most important thing I have for them is just admiration for stepping up and doing public service at a time when it's very, very easy to be a critic. It really is, but it's probably the barrier to being a critic has never been lower. So the people who step up, who take that sacrifice, and I know the governor well enough to know that she's obviously incredibly talented leader and smart, but also just deeply ethical person, and she's surrounded herself from the people I know, people like Jen Davenport with just deeply ethical and professional people who are going to do a great job. So they don't need my advice, but I'm certainly here to help, and I'm rooting for them.
got it. Great. Now let's talk about your new venture. Tell us how that came about. You could have gone to any law firm. I'm sure you were being reached out to. So tell us how this came about.
Yeah, look, I mean, I was privileged. I had a bunch of opportunities, and as I thought about it, I really decided that I didn't want to be in a position where if there was something impactful that I could do, that I'd have to ask 50 people for permission. Or if it wasn't going to make enough money, would it meet some rubric? And I get it. I'm not begrudging them. Businesses are businesses, and the bigger you get, the more you have to be driven by those calculuses. And I've worked at two large law firms, and I actually love my time at them. I worked at Debevoise and Lowenstein. They're great firms. I have a lot of friends there. They do great work. But for me, I wanted to be nimble. I wanted to not have conflicts, and I wanted to be able to take on tough cases, including cases that might not make any money. And so, that's when I decided, you know what? Like if I think I can make it work, like I go back to what I said before. I've made a lot of decisions in my career that maybe don't make a ton of sense in the moment, but put your money where your mouth is. Yes, it meant not taking the big payday that might have been available, but that's okay. This is a moment, I think, in our nation's history. And I'll just say, like, there are a lot of lawyers over the past year who I think have stepped up. I've seen them. I'm working with them now. I worked with them as AG at great consequence and risk for themselves. And then there are a lot of lawyers who have let me down. And that's not like saying that I don't understand why they did it, but I became a lawyer because I wanted to fight on behalf of people who were being hurt. That plain and simple. And so I wanted to build something that was positioned to do that. And I'm fortunate that I was able to bring with me some of the best lawyers that I know. Angela Kai was my executive assistant attorney general, oversaw all of our civil work, handled all of our guns cases, as well as our affirmative cases. Ravi Ramanathan, who brought all of the civil guns cases that I mentioned, is just a tremendous litigator. Aaron Heyer, who was my senior counsel, overseeing all of our tech work. Look, we are taking on big cases. We are already filing cases and working around the clock, it seems. We're growing, which is a great problem to have. But I'm really excited. You know what? I'm really also excited. This is, I know, relevant to you, Jim. I'm excited to build a small business in Newark, which is what we're doing, and that's really important to me. And so I'm having a lot of fun. It's very different, you go from having 8,000 people in your department and there's 90 layers before people can get stuff to you to, being able to roll up my sleeves again, write briefs, represent our clients and hopefully fight for things that matter.
Got it. But clarify, what are the focus areas of the firm, just for folks to know?
Yeah, so we say we're mission driven. We're mainly plaintiffs side, but not exclusively. The areas where we are doing a lot of work, we're doing a lot of rule of law work. We filed earlier this week with Democracy Defenders a complaint about the Trump family's engagement and business dealings with crypto. We're doing a lot of guns work. So we will continue to do things that I did in the office, and we're doing a lot of big consumer cases. So cases involving the tech industry, healthcare, environment, representing public entities and private entities across the country to address harms that are being brought by powerful interests. And we're also doing, some civil litigation on behalf of clients representing their interests in court. So we are a litigation shop, trial and appellate courts, both in New Jersey and across the country.
Got it. You mentioned, working for other law firms. Obviously we've seen other law firms buckle under the pressure of the administration. How do you, as an AG, former AG, as a lawyer on your own now, how do you view those capitulations or the however you want to call it by certain firms?
Well, I've been very vocal about this. I think they were horrible decisions in the moment that have only gotten worse with time. I do think this is a look yourself in the mirror moment. I led the amicus briefs for three of the four firms that sued over the executive orders for Jenner, for Sussman, and for Wilmer. Perkins Coie was led by Washington, but we were on that brief as well. And by the way, my understanding is they've had pretty good business years after challenging those orders, so I think it was a bad business decision. But at the end of the day, if lawyers can't go to court on behalf of their clients without fear that there will be government retribution simply for doing their job in that way, then we don't live in a democracy. And so, um, I was disappointed in members of our profession, including people that I know, who decided that it was more convenient to capitulate and take the immediate, so seemingly advantageous route for their business, than to stand up for core principles. And look, I get it. They make a lot of money, those firms, and their partners make a lot of money, and they were afraid that they might lose partners or lose clients. But you know what? Something has to matter enough that you say, I'm going to stand up for it. And I talked, by the way, to Republican AGs, many of whom are my friends, and I said to them, pick your firm that's often on the other side of us on your politically charged issues. If this were the Harris administration doing this to them, I would be the first person out there with you saying it can't be done. And there have been conservative lawyers who have said that, people like Paul Clement. But It's been too few, frankly. And I think the ones who decided to capitulate, like I said, I think they failed that test in the moment, and it's only looked worse in the months since.
Got it. It's been a great conversation, Matt. Thank you for coming on. We usually end with a poem or a quote or a saying. What do you want to share?
I normally would quote Springsteen, which I could do all day. I do feel it's like "The Wish" is a great song, which is actually a sad song, but there's a great line where it's a funny old world, where a little boy's wishes come true. And I do feel that way as the life I've been able to live in New Jersey. I really wanted to be involved here and have that. But as I was talking about the folks in the governor's office, the FDR quote about the man in the arena is always one of my favorites. And I think that that's really important for people in government to remember that, like, it's easy for people to take their shots. You just have to kind of tune it out because ultimately the people who deserve the credit are the public servants doing the work right now, and they're working around the clock. You don't see them, those of you out there, and you may disagree with things they do, but I had the privilege of seeing it up close. And a lot of those folks are still there, and they are, trust me when I tell you, they are the hardest working, most dedicated people that I've ever met in my life. So I do think they deserve the credit.
Got it. And this has been great. Matt, thanks so much for coming on, and I wish you all the best with your new venture, your new law firm, and look forward to your continued leadership in both the New Jersey community, the regional community, and nationally. So thanks again.
I really appreciate it, Jim. Thanks for having me.